Welcome to Dr. Mensch, the radio show that takes a real, compassionate look at mental health from A to Z. Join child and adolescent psychiatrist Dr. Gil Lichtshein each week as we explore topics that matter: autism, ADHD, anxiety, depression, OCD, schizophrenia, behavioral challenges, neurodevelopmental disorders, and more. No stigma, no judgment. Just honest conversations, new therapies, breakthrough treatments, and real solutions for real people. Mental health is not a weakness. It's a treatable medical condition, and help is available. Join the conversation now by calling the studio at 888-994-4995, Studio A. This is Dr. Mensch, where hope and healing begin.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Dr. Gil Lichtshein, aka Dr. Mensch. I'm a board-certified child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist located in beautiful Boca Raton, Florida. My office is located in the 7100 West Camino Real, Suite 404. My phone number is 561-300-4052. These last few weeks, I've had Freddie as a guest, and we've been relishing in New York Knicks and their march to the NBA Finals and other NBA champions. It's now summer, basketball is over, hockey is over, although the Panthers made a huge trade yesterday. We have the World Cup, and then, baseball kind of rules for the next month and a half until football comes. But today, since I'm here alone, Freddie is away, I'm going to talk about something that always comes up for me. It's summer, but the issue with summer is, the question about whether or not children should continue taking their medication over the summer, and primarily, really specifically about their, ADHD medication. Just the other day, I got an email from a mother who asked me that, said, hey, that her son is going away to camp in the next week, and she was wondering about lowering the dose of his stimulant. He's taking a specific one called Jornay that has really helped him tremendously, and she has been so thrilled about how he did this year in school. So she emailed me saying that she's concerned that maybe it might keep him up at camp, but it hasn't had any effects on his sleep so far, and so she was wondering about whether or not she could lower the dose in half. And in a nice way, my response was like, why would you want to do that? And her response is, again, I'm afraid that it might affect his sleep in camp. And I said, well, has it affected it so far? And she's like, no. So I'm like, why do you think it's going to all of a sudden affect his sleep while he's in camp? And she kind of really, didn't have, really an explanation or a real response. And I kind of went into with her and saying, listen, camp may not be school in terms of there are no tests, may not have homework. You don't have to sit in the classroom and listen to a teacher lecture or talk to you for 45 to 50 minutes. But, I say summer camp, has rules. You got to get up at a certain time. You go to sleep at a certain time. There's activities. You have a counselor. You got to listen to him or her. I mean, things, there are rules. And so, I told her, I said, this medicine you're giving your son is not just a school pill. I mean, it's really, and on a caveat, she was giving, the medication every day. It wasn't like she was taking weekends off. So she was giving her son the medicine 7 days a week. And so I'm like, why should summer be any different? After kind of back and forth, she's like, you know what, you're right. And she decided, okay, I'm going to keep my son on the same medicine. I was saying, listen, there's an element of routine, and routine plays a role. And if your child's in a good system and a good routine, this medicines have been helping him, not causing any side effects, and really allowed him to flourish. Why would you want to disrupt that routine? And then all of a sudden you disrupt it, and let's say you cut the dose in half or stop it, and then who knows what could happen in camp, or then even looking ahead once school starts. I mean, is this child going to have the same response to the medicine as he had before? And then let's say, he doesn't, that creates a whole other like Pandora's box of problems. So kind of after this little back and forth, the mom kind of agreed that, it's best, to keep her child on the medicine. And, I get this all the time, when it comes to summer, about giving their kids like a medication holiday. And, it's something that's always kind of puzzling to me because, yes, medications this is really applies to really ADHD, because medications used to treat depression and anxiety are not medications that work quickly and work for a finite period of time like stimulants do. So this really pertains primarily to ADHD medicine, but it still kind of perplexes me because, in my mind, ADHD is not just a school thing. It's a 24/7 thing. It's not something that just exists in a vacuum and only happens in school and then nowhere else. I mean, if that's the case, then that's really not ADHD. ADHD just doesn't disappear the minute the school bell rings and the child gets on the school bus or is picked up by their parents and they go home. ADHD doesn't take a vacation because it's Thanksgiving or Hanukkah or Christmas or July 4th. I mean, ADHD, by definition, occurs in two or more domains and really affects an individual kind of globally. So it's not just in school, but it affects them outside of school, in camp, soccer. It affects younger kids with play dates, getting along with other people. Once you get into adulthood, paying bills on time, getting to work on time, not being late to appointments, not getting into car accidents or other traffic violations. So ADHD is not just a school thing. The other approach I take is, I explain that ADHD is a medical condition, no different than diabetes, no different than high blood pressure, no different than asthma, no different than epilepsy. And I'll tell a parent, okay, if your child has diabetes, are you going to stop their insulin over their summer? Like, hell no, we're not going to do that. And I'm like, why not? Well, that's dangerous. Or, he is diabetic. I'm like, okay, correct. Your child's diabetic, has type 1 diabetes, and needs their insulin. Why? How is ADHD any different? Well, they'll give me this song and dance story, and I'm like, well, ADHD is a medical condition no different than diabetes. Okay, maybe if you do not give your child their Adderall for 2 or 3 days, it may not result in them going into diabetic ketoacidosis and possibly die, but nonetheless, I mean, ADHD, can cause impairment and affect the child's functioning in other ways. So while if you withhold your child's insulin for a whole weekend might result them in, having a, hyperosmolar crisis or go into what's called diabetic ketoacidosis, and they might wind up in the ICU, if you withhold a child's Adderall or whatever stimulant for a weekend, okay, it may not result in them winding up in the intensive care unit, but nonetheless, it could cause its own types of problems. Let's say, problems at synagogue or church, problems at Publix, problems going out to a movie or dinner, getting into fights with your siblings or friends. So, I mean, ADHD, rears its ugly head in different ways than, let's say, diabetes or epilepsy. And so trying to, make this kind of comparison or similar, kind of make it similar to, like, you would never stop a child's, seizure drugs over the summer because they haven't had a seizure in a year. Likewise, you shouldn't be stopping a child's ADHD medicine if they're stable, doing great, and tolerating the medicine. I tell that to adults too. Like, if you have high cholesterol or high blood pressure, I mean, it's not a medicine that you decide, well, during the week, at work, I'm eating, the garbage, cafeteria food that's all unhealthy. But then when I'm home on weekends, I eat clean, I cook healthy, I watch what I eat, so I don't take my Lipitor or my atenolol or whatever medicine over the weekend. Well, that's not how cholesterol or blood pressure management works. If you're on medicine, it's something you should be taking every day to kind of keep your blood pressure or your level of cholesterol or triglycerides under control. You start messing around with it, you start messing around with blood pressure medicines, that could cause some serious problems. You mess around with cholesterol medicines, okay, maybe you're not going to see any immediate effects, but in the long term, if you have, if your LDLs or triglycerides aren't, effectively, maintained or managed because you're playing around with your statins, well, you're putting yourself at risk for developing coronary artery disease, perhaps 5, 10, 20 years down the road. So I kind of try to educate parents to say mental illness is a medical problem no differently than diabetes or high cholesterol or thyroid problems or anything like that. Now, a lot of times patients have a hard time kind of understanding that or kind of seeing the similarities. And a lot of times it has to do with we don't have tests to diagnose you with ADHD or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. But what I tell patients is, okay, maybe that's true, and that let's say you could be diagnosed with high cholesterol because you went to your primary care doctor and you had blood drawn, and let's say your cholesterol was 350 or your triglycerides was 300, and you're put on some type of medication, and then your doctor will say, come back in 3 months, we'll recheck your labs, let's change your diet, let's get exercise, etc. But in that 3-month period of time, if you were to be asked, well, how are you feeling? Do you think your cholesterol is better? You have no way of knowing until you get the blood test. In psychiatry, we may not have blood tests to diagnose you, say, with schizophrenia or major depression or ADHD, but when we put you on a medication, let's say, Zoloft to treat your anxiety, again, like I said, there's no blood test to show that you have anxiety. There's no brain scan or anything like that, but you get prescribed Zoloft, and let's say you come back 6 weeks later, the person, the patient, the individual, him or herself is going to be able to tell you, yeah, I'm feeling calmer, I'm feeling more relaxed. You don't actually need a blood test to prove that, unlike, let's say, with cholesterol or diabetes, where you have to have a blood, you're without doing an AccuCheck, you're on insulin or you're on or metformin, are you going to really know if your sugars are down? Perhaps you might, but maybe not so as accurate as, let's say, with anti-anxiety medication. On that note, I'm going to take a brief commercial break.
What happens when the mind of a healer crosses over into the darkness of the human soul? From authors David Icovetti, Dr. Gil Lichtshein, and Yolanda DeLuca comes a chilling psychological thriller, Dr. Mensch, A Prescription for Evil. This gripping novel follows a respected Boca Raton psychiatrist who secretly descends into madness, transforming into a modern-day king of the underworld. Inspired by true events and Dr. Gil's childhood connection to a mob family, this story blurs the line between sanity and evil, genius and destruction. Unforgettable, disturbing, impossible to put down. Get your copy today on Amazon.com. Dr. Mensch, A Prescription for Evil, a 2020 psychological crime thriller. You're listening to Dr. Mensch with child and adolescent psychiatrist Dr. Gil Lichtshein. For a copy of his powerful new book, Dr. Mensch's Prescription for Evil, visit Amazon.com. For more information or to schedule a consultation, contact Dr. Gil directly at 561-300-4052 or visit docgil.com. Now, let's get back to the show.
Hello there, this is Dr. Mensch, or Dr. Gil Lichtshein, returning back from our brief commercial break. I was talking about, before we stepped away, I was talking about this kind of trying to help my patients understand that mental health or mental illness, to try to look at it no differently than any other medical problems. And that, and if you're able to kind of see it that way, you might be more open and understanding of like how to treat it. Again, I don't treat, a lot of medical problems. No, people don't come to me to treat their asthma or treat their epilepsy or treat their high blood pressure. But I might, I'm gonna be bold to make the statement, and I could be incorrect, but I don't know how many patients in other specialties of medicine, let's say, who have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, who get prescribed some blood pressure medicine or cholesterol medicine, and after a month or two decide, hey, I'm better, and I'm getting off of it. I mean, they might wait till they get their blood test 3-4 months later and then talk with their doctor, hey, how much longer do I need to be on this? But in psychiatry, I see all the time, maybe not all the time, but a lot of times where, I have patients who get prescribed, a medication for whatever, anxiety, depression, mania, psychosis, you name it, and they're prescribed it, and then they take it for a month or two, and then they stop it. Like, yeah, I felt better, I don't need it anymore. And then their symptoms kind of come back and really bite them in the behind, even bigger and badder than before. Again, I don't treat patients with other, they don't come to me to get their other medical problems treated, but I can imagine that primary care docs in general or specialists don't necessarily see as much of that as in psychiatry. And so when I have that situation with patients, I tell them, listen, you have major depression, you have ADHD, you have OCD, and this is when you're talking about ADHD. I said, there is no cure for that, but I tell parents that I always kind of tell parents, if your child is to be diagnosed with any psychiatric disorder, I say it's either anxiety or anxiety or ADHD. And the reason being is both are very responsive to pharmacological treatment. Now, while there's no cure for either, anxiety or ADHD, I do tell parents, listen, there are some children and adolescents as they grow up into adulthood that they kind of outgrow or grow out of their ADHD, and that they wind up, I guess you could say, cured. I'm going to say that in quotes. I also tell parents, hey, I'm putting your child on Adderall or whatever stimulant at the age of, say, 8 or 9. It doesn't mean that by the time they're 20 or 30 that they're necessarily going to be on it or stay on it. They still may be symptomatic, but they may not need medication, or they may wind up being on medicine. I mean, this concept that you outgrow ADHD is not necessarily accurate, and that it does persist in a fair amount of adults. But again, this is, no different than, let's say, diabetes. You're diagnosed with diabetes as a child, there is no cure. I mean, unless you get a new pancreas, you're on insulin, it treats it, or you're on whatever other medicines out there to treat it. You're on it probably for the rest of your life, and it treats your diabetes. You have high blood pressure or thyroid problems or high cholesterol, and when you're put on medicines for those, you're on those for probably several years, maybe indefinitely, depending on the situation and kind of the behind the scenes circumstances, so to speak. So I try to tell these parents about the ones who like, I want to take my kids off their stimulants for the summer. Again, I ask them, like, why do you want to do that? Why do you want to disrupt your child's kind of routine? They're kind of in a good place. Why do you want to potentially, disrupt that? I mean, I can remember I have one parent who, I'm gonna say the child's therapist several years ago was like begging me to see this kid. Kid needed to be on meds and was like failing, profoundly in school. I remember the kid was going to Grandview Prep. I'm pretty like competitive elementary and middle school in Boca, And finally, the mom reluctantly agreed to try Vyvanse. This was several years ago, and wow, that was like she's just kind of like, wow, this is a miracle drug. But then a couple summers ago, she's like, I'm going to take my kid off the Vyvanse. I'm like, why are you going to do that? Like, he's going to camp. Well, what happened? After about 2 weeks in camp, he got the boot. He was kicked out of camp, and now mom had to went up to, I don't know if it was in like New York or New Hampshire. It was up in somewhere in the Northeast in New England. And then the mom had to like figure out, what am I going to do with my kid for like a month and a half? So I said to her, like, why did you, trying to be nice and non-judgmental, but saying like, why did you take him off his meds? Again, trying to explain to her, ADHD doesn't take the summer off, and that camp can pose its own challenges, albeit perhaps different challenges than school. And that, again, ADHD is not just a school thing. It's an everyday 24/7 event. It exists with you throughout your whole day, every day, 365, 24/7, 365 days a year. Yeah, there could be good, some days that are better than others, but it doesn't mean that, that's a sign that, okay, I'll just not give, kids their meds on the weekends or holidays or summers. Now, at the same time, I'm not going to get into a battle or outright war with a parent who says, I'm not giving my child, their medicine on weekends, holidays, and summer breaks. And I'm like, okay, fine. I'm not going to start battling you, but I make them aware. Listen, just think about the potential consequences. Things are going good. Do you want to start upsetting this kind of equilibrium? And so I just kind of put that in their mind of like, just think about how it could impact your child's, let's say, experience at summer camp, or let's say you go on a family trip or a teen tour. Because again, as it was talked about before about ADHD, it's a lot of times it's not like the symptoms themselves that might be impairing. It's kind of the associated aspects of ADHD. Kids with ADHD often have a lot of social difficulties. Because of their like verbal, I call it verbal diarrhea or motoric, impulsivity, they can get in your face. They can, just be annoying. They may say things before they think about it. They kind of have sometimes the same type of social difficulties the kids on the autism spectrum have. They have sometimes a hard time reading social cues. A lot of it has to do more with more impulsivity and kind of they get distracted and they just kind of, speak first before they think. But nonetheless, it's those kind of associated symptoms that sometimes can be more impairing and disruptive, so to speak, to a child's life than their inattention or disruptive behaviors. And so I tell parents these medications also help with those aspects. Kind of like that's how it kind of working behind the scenes. Yes, it's helping. The thing they see is my kid's now getting A's, whereas before they were getting C's and D's. But it's kind of these other aspects like the social benefits where these medicines come into play that I'll say to parents, why do you want to potentially affect your child's ability to have fun in camp? Because again, part of camp also is, meeting new kids, developing new, circle of friends, getting along with the counselors, getting along with, I guess, camp administrative staff. If that's going to be a problem, a child's not going to last long in camp. And like that parent I talked to you about before, camp called the mom and said, your kid's out of control, he's out. And the mom had to schlep up all the way up to New England and bring her kid back home to South Florida. So, I always say, like, you want your child to have a fun, enjoyable summer. Why do you want to, or what benefit is to disrupt a good routine that they've gotten into now for whether it be, weeks, months, or years. You don't want to upset the balance. Don't rock the boat. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I really do believe a lot of times that if things aren't broken, you don't want to just perhaps like rock the boat and upset the kind of the balance of things. So I'm hoping that when I tell patients, again, think of ADHD no differently than epilepsy or diabetes or asthma. If your child is asthmatic, and they have to take asthma medicine every day, you're not going to necessarily decide, the weekends, they're at home, I'm not going to give them their asthma medicine. And then the last thing you want is them to all of a sudden have an asthma attack, and next thing you're in the emergency room having to go with emergency nebulizer treatments. So again, Ritalin, a lot of times they don't look at like Ritalin or Adderall the same as, say, what's used to treat like seizures, like Keppra or Depakote, but in other ways, I also tell them these stimulants are generally also well tolerated and relatively non-toxic medications when used in clinically appropriate doses. I'm like, Adderall, again, when used clinically, doesn't damage your liver like Depakote can, doesn't cause pancreatitis like Depakote can. So a lot of times I'll put things also in that perspective, saying, concern that they have about, terrible side effects. There are other medications that are prescribed that have far more toxic side effects than any stimulant medication. And I'll give the perfect example, too, that a drug that anybody can get anywhere, Tylenol. That not only is toxic to your liver, but if you take too much, could wind up killing you. So can't really say the same with Adderall. Yeah, perhaps if you decide to overdose on a whole bottle, but I mean, it doesn't take a whole bottle of Tylenol to potentially kill your liver. So the bottom line is, it's my opinion, kids should stay on their ADHD meds over the summer, because camp can be just as stimulating as school, and you want to make a child's experience at camp productive, and allow them to have a very enjoyable and happy summer. And on that note, this is Dr. Gil Lichtshein, aka Dr. Mensch, wishing everybody a good rest of your week. And until next Monday, you all have a good, enjoyable, warm, enjoyable week. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us for Dr. Mensch with Dr. Gil Lichtshein, helping you navigate the world of mental health with clarity and care. If you or someone you love needs support, you're not alone. Treatment works and recovery is possible. To schedule a consultation or discuss non-medication therapies, personalized treatment plans, or psychiatric care, contact Dr. Gil directly at 561-300-4052 or visit docgil.com. You can catch us each week on South Florida Oldies Radio and streaming across all social platforms. Until next time.